Hi bag builders, it's Diane from Spencer Ogg Sewing Patterns and thank you for joining me. Today is kind of a twofold tutorial. It started off and I was going to demonstrate to you how to use a rivet press and what types of rivets to use for your bag making, what dies to use, etc. However, in the process of making that tutorial I realised I needed a quick and easy bag to demonstrate on. So I developed a beginner friendly bag to show you how to use the rivets and the different types of hardware. So first I'm going to demonstrate how to make this super quick and easy bag. It's a two-piece only, so literally two pieces of fabric. There's no interfacings or anything in there. It's fully faced inside and it's fully lined, and it's a really nice handy little bag. I'll also show you how to change the dimensions of it at the end, so you can make it into a shorter version, more handbag style-y. More crossbody style. You can make it into a bigger shopper or bigger box bottom, so I'll share all that information at the end with you as well, so you can make it into what you want. So once we've got that basic construction, I'm then going to show you how to use the rivet press, what types of rivets, what sizes, what works for bag making, and I hope you find it really useful. If you're looking for information on stitch on handles, like the bag over here, there is another YouTube video on stitch on handles, but the basic of the bag works fine, and then you can use the stitch on handle method with the same bag. So let's get going. Do subscribe to my YouTube channel for lots more free content. So this is our two-piece bag. It's really simple, and I'm going to show you the supplies we're going to need to make that. So predominantly is the two pieces. So first of all, I'm going to be using some upholstery weight fabric. So anything with a decent weight to it that'll hold its own weight and quite firm. And then for the lining, I'm going to be using a thermal curtain lining. So if you're happy with white or cream for the lining of a bag, then this is really useful stuff to keep in your armoury. It's actually available at most curtain stores, home decorating stores. It comes in a really wide roll. In the UK it's only about £6.50 a metre, something similar. Tightly woven front, and then on the back you can see there's a layer of thermal wadding, and that's already applied to it, and it's very firmly stuck. I use that quite a lot. It's very, very handy. It avoids, if you're just making a quick project, you don't need to use interfacings, you don't need to apply waddings or fusible fleeces to your project, and it gives it a good structure without having to add layers and layers of other things in there. So those are the two fabrics I'm going to use for the bag itself. And then the choice is yours as to what handles you want to put on there. I am going to apply a little bit of fusible canvas to the top, and that's literally just to strengthen behind where we're going to put the eyelets through, sorry, the rivets through. And you can use anything for that. It's anything that will give it a little bit of strength and hold the rivets in place. So it could be a woven fusible, it could be some Decaville, it could be a piece of vinyl, anything that's quite strong. And then depending on which straps you want to attach, I'm going to show you how to attach a crossbody strap at the sides. And to do that, I've got a 50-inch crossbody strap already pre-bought and pre-made. I'll need some D-rings, those 3/4 inch D-rings, and I'll need two connectors. Now, if you prefer to use tote straps, then we can apply those as well using rivets, and I'll show you how to do that. These straps, by the way, are all available in my store, spencerogg.com. They're great quality products, and I've developed them over a number of years. They're great prices. They're what I use in all my bag making. But you can make your own. You can just use leather strapping and punch a hole through to add your rivets. The last and final thing is the rivets themselves. Again, they can be single cap or double cap that you could use, but I am going to use double cap for this project because you can see the back of them. I'll explain a little more in detail about that when we come to use the rivets. I think these are 8mm shaft rivets that I'm going to be using today. So that's everything you're going to need for the project. So let's get started with the project. So first I'm going to cut my two rectangles from fabric. So from my outer fabric, I'm going to cut a strip which is 33 inches long by 13.5 inches wide. So that's just one long strip, but if you haven't got a piece of fabric long enough, or you've got a two-way print, you can actually seam it in the middle, which I have done here because I didn't have a piece long enough in the shelves when I came to look this morning. So mine is pieced, but you just need one long strip. And then I'm going to cut the lining. This is my thermal curtain lining, and that I'm going to cut at 23 inches by 13.5 inches. The difference is 10 inches, and that's what's going to give us the facing at the top of the bag. And I'll explain that more later and how to change the sizing should you want to and the shape of the bag. The seam allowance is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch all the way through the pattern. And just before we start, I've applied our strips of interfacing just to the top of the bag here, just a couple of centimetres or an inch down. I've just estimated where the rivets are going to fall once we come to rivet the bag. But you can lay it on in strips now, you can put it on later on once you've seamed it, or you can just use little squares or rounds of Decaville or something similar and slip your hand up inside the bag and add them behind the rivets as you're putting them on if you prefer. So let's make a start. So the first thing we're going to do is attach the lining to the outer at the top. So flip your outer panel over so your right side uppermost and grab your lining, lay that right side down so you've got right sides facing, and we're going to match up the short edges at the top and bottom. So we clip that one in place there. Pull it round and clip the other side, the other short edge of the outer to the lining. And you'll see, obviously, you've got that extra on the outer fabric. So it's going to end up like this. So I'll just go to the sewing machine and I'll stitch those two short edges across at the 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I've gone ahead and I've seamed those short edges, outer to lining, and I've pressed the seam open, and that'll help give us a nice smooth appearance later on, and it'll mean we're not sewing over too many humps and bumps all in one place. If you do want to add a magnetic clasp to the bag, you can add it at this point. Just measure across halfway, both ends of the outer fabric, and apply your magnetic clasp halfway across, about 1 inch down on both sides. So male on one side, female on the other, both on the outer. Our next step is to join the side seams. This really is a quick bag, honestly. So flip it over so your outer is facing outer and lining is facing lining, right sides together, and match the seams where you joined outer to lining. I'm just going to put a clip in there, so just lean over. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So matching those gives it a really nice finish at the end. And then I'm going to clip down both sides. Now one side we're going to stitch all the way down, and the other side we're going to leave a big gap in the lining. Oh, look at that, that's terrible, my clips don't match. Some red, some pink. I've got hair clips and everything in there. So on one side of the lining we're going to leave a gap, but I do want to leave enough to make a box bottom on here. So I need a part of a seam to allow me the space to make a decent box bottom. So I'm going to leave the lining open on the side just below the facing seam to about 2.5 inches up from the bottom edge. Put a pen mark on there if you want to, or a couple of pins just to remind you to leave that gap open. So I'll go ahead and I'll seam that now. So I've gone ahead and I've stitched my side seams. I've left that gap of about 8 inches in one side seam on the lining, and I've folded that back and pressed the side seams, the seam allowances, out of the way to give us a neater finish at the end when we come to close the gap. So you can finish there if you want a flat bag, or I'm going to add box bottoms to it. So I'm just going to give a narrow 1.5 inch box bottom to this bag. So to line up your box bottoms, I do have a full tutorial on the secret of box bottoms on YouTube, so do have a look at that. So I'll just do it very briefly today, but there's a full tutorial on there, and I'll put the link in above somewhere, one other side or the other, and I'll put it in below. But just open up your bag. We want to make sure everything's lined up. I tend to fold it into kind of a kite shape to make sure that all my angles lining up. So line it up on a board, make sure all your seams are in line. As I say, follow it on the other video because it will make much more sense on there. I'm just going to do it quickly today. And then I want a 1.5 inch box bottom, so literally I'm going to do 1.5 inches in total across the corner, but we want to make sure that's square. So line everything up on your cutting board, make sure everything's in line with each other and those seams are completely open at the bottom. 1.5 inches. I'm going to use my ruler sort of midway so I can see that it's still lined up on the board. So 1.5 inches, just wiggle it down till you get there. Draw a line across. Obviously use disappearing pen. I'm using this so you can see it. Clip in place. There's a 1.5 inch box bottom, so I'm just going to stitch across that line. I'm going to repeat that for all 4 corners. So that's all 4 corners done. We're now ready to turn it through. As to the ends, you can either snip them off or leave them on. The choice is really yours. If it's a big bag, I often leave them on because they can kind of support the bottom edge a little bit. But you can also get a cleaner corner if you chop them off. So it is a personal preference, really. I'll trim them back to about 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. And we're ready to turn it through. So go to your gap in the lining, there we are, and turn it through. And that's just how easy this bag is. And make it in no time. Push your corners out. You don't need any implements to do this. It's really just fingers. And then pop the lining inside and get your fingers into the corners of the lining and push them right in until they reach the corners of the outer. So you've got to have to grab the bag a little way down to do that. And you can see that the top of the bag is folding in to form a facing because your lining is so much shorter than the bag itself. So I'll do that on both sides. And there we go. So there is basically the structure of our bag. How easy was that? So we're now ready to start adding our handles and deciding, do we want it as a messenger bag, crossbody bag, do we want it as a tote bag? So I'll just take it to the ironing board and give it a quick press first, and then we'll start riveting. So I've pressed my bag, I've made sure the facing is the same depth all the way around. I just measured it as I went just to ensure I'm getting a straight, because if the facing's the correct depth, then your bag is going to be the correct depth as well. So that's all fitted in very nicely. So you can see how that facing works. You don't have to do a separate piece for that at all. As long as you make the bag longer, that amount will drop inside. So we're on to our rivet on handles. So let's start by making this into a messenger bag by adding a crossbody strap. So rivets. So rivets and sizes for bag making. Rivets are a wonderful addition for bag making. Obviously, they're great for attaching handles and adding strength to strap carriers, etc. But they're also brilliant for just adding decoration to a bag. They really add a professional look to your bag. Buy good quality rivets. Cheap ones, and especially free ones, can buckle. I tend to use either Emmeline or Tandy rivets most of the time, and they are available worldwide. So let's look at choosing the size of your rivet and then move on to the different types and how to apply them. So the sizes I use in my bag making tend to range between a 6mm and a 9mm cap, and this refers to the domed top edge or the top cap. These ones are double cap rivets, and I'll explain those shortly, but you can see there's a cap on both sides. So ranging from very small to larger. I don't tend to go more than about a 9mm cap. And then the shaft, which is the pin, the shaft or the shank or the post, which is the pin that protrudes from the cap on one side. That comes in various lengths as well. And again, I tend to use between a 6mm and a 1cm shaft or shank. We want to match the cap size to the project. So if you're using a large bag or a large strap, it'll look better with a larger cap. But if you're doing a small purse or a delicate item, it'll look better with a much smaller cap. You can see that there. So the shaft or the shank of the rivet needs to be matched to the amount of layers. So that's nothing to do with the look of the bag. That's how many layers or the depth of the fabric that you're going to be squeezing in between those two caps. So a small 2-layer item might only need something like a 5mm shaft or a 6mm shaft, but a bag with lots of layers like the one we're making today, or that it's quite squidgy, there's lots of bulk there, needs something like an 8 or 9mm shaft. The larger cap sizes tend to go with a larger shank, and it's quite hard to find a large cap with a small shank or a small cap with a large shank, so you kind of have to work with what you can get a lot of the time. So push your rivet through, decide what length you need. You want to kind of push your rivet through the amount of layers that you're going to be using. So I've pushed that through fabric and through my strap, and you can just see there's a small amount protruding there, and that's how we're really assessing it. We just want 1mm or 2mm just protruding, peeking over the top, so we can actually latch the second cap onto it and you'll be able to click it on. And the die you use needs to be the same. So this is what we're going to attach it with, and I'll show them in the machine later on, but that needs to match, that die that you put in the machine needs to match the size of the cap itself. That will avoid distortion or the rivet bending. You can normally get away with it if it's sort of a millimetre smaller. Your cap's a millimetre smaller, say, than the die, but I wouldn't do anything more than that. And really, if you can get one exactly the right size, then do. Two types of rivets. If we're just using regular domed rivets, there is a single cap rivet, which you can see one side has a domed appearance there, and the other side we've got the shank, but on that side you can see there's kind of an indent or a hole in it, and that's what we call a single cap rivet. Now, to apply those, the type of dies you would need, is the top would be a domed side like that to fit the cap in, and the bottom would have a kind of a pin on it like this. So you can see the bottom of the rivet, the hole or the indent, fits nicely onto there, and it does make it very secure and it holds it in place well. But when you're making a bag where you can see both sides of the rivet, like we are here, so we'll actually see the rivet on the inside, I prefer to use a double cap rivet. So both sides have a domed effect. So it doesn't matter which way on it goes. So you can see that the side that has the pin also has a domed cap on the side as well. They're both very secure and very strong. I never really found much of a difference in strength, but I tend to use the double cap rivets or buy the double cap rivets because they work for whether you can see it or whether you can't see the back of it. Okay, so I'll get rid of those dies. So the dies we're going to use for these are domed, so basically both sides have a domed indent, top and bottom. And remember, that shape has to exactly replicate the size and shape of your cap, because otherwise it will bend and it will push it into a different shape when you try to apply it. Okay, so that's my bottom one in and my top one in. And this is a hand press. This one is from Green Grizzly. There's quite a few, or there's a couple of really good suppliers in the UK. I think they sell the Green Grizzlies in the US as well, just under a different name. but I found it very reliable. I've got no complaints about it. It's served me well. You can buy lots of different dies, lots of different rivet shapes, and you know, you can usually get your money's worth out of them. They're a lot more reliable than the small tools that you try and apply using a hammer and a tube. They're a little bit hit and miss, I find, so much better off if you can afford a hand press and you're going to get some use out of it, then do invest in one. So on to our crossbody straps. So we're going to attach them at the side seams for crossbody straps. So I'm going to use 2 D-rings and 2 strap connectors. So we're making this bag for ease and for speed. So obviously you can make these, you can make them from fabric, you can make them from leather and just punch holes in, just punch holes through the fabric afterwards. So thread on your D-ring, and we're going to just overlap that over the side of the bag, just so we can decide where we want to rivet it on. So naturally we do want to go directly across the side seam, but, sorry, I'll just pull that out, right side. But we don't want to puncture the side seam. I've never had an issue with it, but just in case, I tend to punch the hole just a tiny fraction to the side of the side seam, so literally a millimetre, an eighth of an inch, or 16th of an inch. So fold that in half, get it sitting exactly where you want it, and just mark your fabric. Make sure you're in line back and front. And let me grab a pen. So again, I'm using a pen. Don't use a pen, use chalk or something. So I'm going to stay there. Now you can use a hand tool to punch a hole, which is easy at this point because it's really at the top of the bag. So you can get it in there no problem. When we come to something deeper on a bag, further down, then it's more difficult because you don't have much space within there to get it really deep down. So then I tend to use, I might use a bradawl, I might use, there's a Japanese tool, I can't think of the name of it at the moment. I'll grab it in a second, that you just sort of twist down and that will make a hole. But usually with a rivet, it's quite a small hole that's needed. So just a bradawl or something, a sharp pointed implement will make a decent enough hole for that. So let's grab our connector, shaft through one side, through the bag from the back, so you can just see your rivet coming through there. If you are struggling with depth and you haven't got a rivet shank long enough, you can go back in and trim your seam allowances down a little bit, because obviously that'll reduce the depth by a couple of layers as well. And then bend that back over, put your cap on the other side, and clip it on. Make sure you hear a click, and then we're ready to put that under the hand press. So make sure that it's on firmly. Centre the dome on the domed piece of the die, so it's nice and firm. Check underneath, make sure it's sitting correctly, and then we just press. One nice firm press, and there we go. There's our rivet on. So let's do the same on the other side. So I've attached the second side. There we go, our connectors. So it makes that into a beautiful crossbody bag. All we need to do is attach our strap. This is actually one from my own range. It's 50 inches long and 3/4 inches wide. It is much more substantial than most straps on the market, and it's probably the equivalent, well, half the price of the equivalent in stores, because there's no middleman. I'm working direct with the factory. So excuse the quick plug. All we need to do is clip that on, and we have a fabulous, ready to go crossbody bag. So next, let's take a look at adding the tote handles. So tote handles, you can either leave the bag as is, you can add tote handles as well, or you can just have tote handles rather than a crossbody strap as well. It makes it quite a versatile bag, obviously, if you're adding everything. But let's look at just adding the tote handles now to the top of the bag. And we'll mark those out. So let's decide on a position for those handles. I tend to work in thirds. I think that gives the best visual effect. So I'd be working in something like 3¼ inches in from the side seam on both sides. You can obviously have them further apart, closer together. It really is personal choice. And again, how far you have them down the bag is totally up to you. I tend to keep them near the top of the bag, about 3/4 inch from the top of the bag to the first rivet hole, just so I can keep the longest strap available to fit over my arm, because bear in mind, the further down the bag you place the straps, the more you're reducing this length of strap. So for me, 3¼ inches in, 3½, 3¼ let's look. That's 3¼ to there. And I want to have it about 3/4 inch down from the top edge to the first rivet hole. And I'm just going to go straight in with a bradawl. There we go. So you can use a pen mark or a bradawl. That's my first one. Just line that first one up and again to the second one. Make sure it's at right angles to your top edge. Yeah. So that's my holes made ready. And sod's law has it that my camera stopped working just as I was riveting that first one. So apologies for that. I'll do it again a second time. Here we go. So I've positioned that, same again, 3¼ in, 3/4 inches down. And I'm going to mark with my bradawl the position. Just make sure I've got some nice holes there. And then I'll grab the rivets. Rivets in from underneath. One, two. Do try and, if you're fiddling around on the top here and it's not coming through, just try and separate the threads. Don't snap the threads, because you could get a pull in your fabric. There it goes. And then other side of the handle on. There we go, you can see the rivets sticking up through there. And caps on top. 1, 2, hear the snap, and then into the rivet press. First one. And second. It is so much easier with a hand press, I have to say, after struggling for years with the hand tools. So there we go, that's one side of our straps attached. I'll go ahead and do the second. So there's the second handles attached too. When you're measuring to put the second handles on, just make sure they lie directly on top of the first set as well, because if you were off a little bit on the underneath side, you better to be off the same amount on the top as well, just so they look even when you come to use it. And there we go, beautiful tote handles. Sew-on handles would work in exactly the same way, and there's a tutorial for sew-on handles on the YouTube channel too, and they can look just as effective on a bag like this. And of course, to complete the bag, don't forget to close up the turning gap inside. So just pull out your lining, and because you pressed those seam allowances inwards, you should have a nice folded edge ready to just clip together. So just clip that in place, making sure the seam allowances are tucked down inside, and just literally top stitch that closed, close to the edge, 1/8 inch, 3mm along the side seam, and then you can tuck that right back in again. So all I need to do now is attach my crossbody strap again, And I've got a beautiful convertible bag with lots of lovely hardware. And I'm sure once you've used rivets, if it's your first time, if you're just thinking about buying a hand press, once you get used to it, there is no going back, honestly. You want to put rivets in everything, and it really is easy. I do hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Don't stop there, this is just a start. Do try other sizes to make it your own. Bear in mind the difference between the length of the outer and the length of the lining in this instance is 5 inches each side, i.e. 10 inches, and that gives you a facing that will drop inside by 2.5 inches. So you need to keep that kind of measurement, but otherwise you can change all the dimensions of this. You can reduce the length to make it into more of a handbag shape. You can make the whole thing larger in width and in depth to make a larger tote. You could increase the bottom, the box bottom, to 3 inches to make it hold much more substantial amount of shopping or whatever in there. You can make it longer and thinner to hold a laptop and have a more crossbody style. Make it in a thinner fabric, and don't add the box bottoms to just make it into a fold-away shopper. Even down to adding pockets to the inside lining before you make it up, or the outside, a flap on the outside. So it's just a start. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you did, please do subscribe to my channel for regular free content on sewing and bag making. And I also have a Facebook board for help and support with all my patterns and lots of bag making chat. So please do join in the fun on there, and I'll add a link in below. Obviously, my products are all available in the shop at spencerogg.com. What are you waiting for? Go sew!